When the dam broke, it didn't just release water. It released every ounce of rage I'd been bottling up for 3 years. The sound was like thunder cracking open the earth, a monstrous roar that rolled down the valley and swallowed the neighborhood whole. The people who once called me the crazy recluse by the lake now stood knee-deep in the consequences of their arrogance. But before all that, before the water, the screaming, the headlines, there was just me, my land, and a dam that had stood strong for 50 years. My name's Ethan Cole, and until a few months ago, I owned 70 acres on the north end of Willow Creek. My grandfather built that dam with his bare hands in 1971, poured concrete, welded gates, and carved a small reservoir that kept the valley alive through decades of drought. He wasn't rich, but he was stubborn, and he believed that water was the one thing a man should always have control over. He left it to my father, and my father left it to me. I never thought I'd have to defend it like a fortress. When I came back to Willow Creek after serving 12 years as a structural engineer in the Army Corps, the place looked wrong. What used to be open farmland had become a sprawling suburban maze. The hills were carved into cul-de-sacs, the trees replaced with cookie-cutter homes. And at the center of it all was a Willow Ridge Homeowners Association, a nest of self-important busybodies who thought their bylaws carried more weight than the Constitution. They'd formed after a developer bought up the surrounding land, promising luxury rural living. The kind of people who moved out of the city just to complain about the smell of manure and the sound of crickets. When I refused to sell my land, I became their favorite villain. It started small. Noise complaints whenever I ran my generator. Letters about my unauthorized fence. Warnings about unsightly equipment when I parked my old backhoe near the property line. But I ignored them until the water board got involved. Apparently, the HOA had filed a claim that my dam was illegally constructed and unsafe. Unsafe? That dam had survived 50 years of floods, storms, and even an earthquake that cracked half the county's pipes. I personally reinforced it with steel reinforcements after my father's death. It wasn't unsafe. It was overbuilt. I met with the county inspector myself. He toured the dam, took photos, nodded approvingly. Then he handed me a report that said exactly what I expected. Structure stable. No evidence of hazard. That should have been the end of it. But the HOA didn't care about evidence. What they cared about was control. The next letter came with a fine, $2,500 for unpaid association dues. I laughed when I read it. My land wasn't part of their development. Never had been. The HOA boundary ended a full half-mile south of my property line. So I sent it back with 2 words written in red Sharpie, not applicable. A week later, I got another. This one was $5,000, then $10,000, then a final notice threatening legal enforcement and property action. I didn't even respond. You can't argue with arrogance that's convinced itself it's law. Still, I started to worry. People like that didn't stop until they were stopped. And then one afternoon, I saw them. 4 men in reflective vests, standing by the dam with clipboards and an excavator idling beside them. What the hell do you think you're doing? I shouted. One of them, a thin man with slick back hair and 2 white teeth, stepped forward. Mr. Cole, I'm Brian Hensley, president of the Willow Ridge HOA. We've received authorization to remove this structure due to unpaid fees and repeated safety violations. I laughed out loud. You don't have authorization to breathe on my property, let alone touch my dam. He smiled that smug, bureaucratic smile that says it's used to people giving up when they see a clipboard. We've already filed the necessary motions with the county, he said. If you have an issue, take it up with your lawyer. They had forged paperwork. I could tell by the letterhead, a mock-up of a county seal that wasn't even the right color. I called the sheriff. But by the time Deputy Lawson arrived, the excavator had already gouged a hole through the dam's overflow gate. Water began to trickle through. Not much at first, just enough to stain the soil. But to me, it felt like blood. The deputy shrugged, hands on his belt. Looks like they've got paperwork. Ethan, I can't interfere in a civil matter. A civil matter. That's what they called it, a civil matter. By sunset, half the gate was gone. I watched from the ridge, fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. The reservoir behind the dam dropped several feet by morning, And the HOA? They sent out an email to all residents at night, bragging about how they had resolved a local safety hazard. They didn't realize that the water they just unleashed would seep downhill, straight toward their brand new development. My dam had held back more than 1,000,000 gallons, regulated through a series of sluice gates I'd maintained myself. Without it, the valley's natural drainage pattern would return, and that pattern flowed directly through their pristine neighborhood of freshly paved driveways and million-dollar homes. But I didn't say a word. Instead, I started collecting things. Blueprints, documents, photos. I even went down to the county office myself, asked for copies of every form the HOA had submitted. And what I found made my blood boil and my lips curl into a smile. Not only had they falsified the authorization to demolish, but they'd also used my dam as collateral for a community improvement grant. They'd taken government money, $150,000, claiming ownership of land that was never theirs. Fraud, plain and simple. That's when the idea started forming. Not all at once, but like a slow-building storm. You ever wonder what it takes to make a man snap? Not anger, not loss, it's injustice. The kind that claws at your ribs until you can't breathe. I didn't want revenge. At least, not at first. I wanted justice. But justice doesn't mean much when the people holding the law think they are untouchable. So, I decided to show them what real consequences looked like. Over the next few weeks, I went quiet. To them, it probably looked like I'd given up. But I was busy, very busy. I set up monitoring equipment along the creek bed, watched how the flow changed with rainfall. I knew the terrain better than anyone. I'd surveyed every inch of it over the years. I saw how the demolished section caused minor floods after storms, pooling near their southern cul-de-sac, Maple Bend Drive. That's where the first cracks appeared, literally. Foundation issues, soggy lawns, complaints about drainage. Brian Hensley sent out panic newsletters about temporary water challenges. I just smiled, and when the next heavy rainstorm came through in late March, I made a small adjustment. A few sandbags, a strategically placed obstruction in the secondary culvert. Nothing dangerous by itself. Just a nudge. Enough to show them that water isn't something you can bully into submission. That night, their retention pond overflowed and flooded half a dozen basements. The HOA called an emergency meeting to discuss liability. I wasn't invited, but I was listening. By then, the story had already begun to take shape, not in my head, but in the soil, in the way nature itself was reclaiming what they stole. And I had every intention of helping it along. You see, revenge isn't about rage. It's about patience, precision. It's about knowing exactly when to let go. And when they came for the last remaining wall of my dam, when the excavator bucket tore through that final slab of reinforced concrete, I was standing at the ridge again. This time, I didn't shout. I just whispered, "You shouldn't have touched it." Because some things are built to hold back more than water. Some things are built to remember. And the valley was about to remember everything. When the last slab of the dam fell, it sounded like a grave being sealed. Concrete hit rock, water surged, and in that instant, everything changed. The Willow Ridge HOA thought they'd won. They thought they had neutralized a hazard, restored natural flow, and protected property values. That was the line they fed to the local paper the next morning. But nature doesn't care about property values, and water doesn't forgive arrogance. 2 days after the demolition, the rain came. Not a gentle drizzle. No, this was a kind of storm that rattled windows and turned ditches into rivers. The sky split open, gray and merciless, drenching the valley in an unrelenting downpour. I stood in my barn doorway, watching the sheets of rain slam into the half-empty reservoir, now just a crater of mud and fractured stone. Without the dam's control gates, the runoff had nowhere to go but down, straight toward Willow Ridge. It started slow, a trickle along Maple Bend Drive, puddles forming where they never used to. By midnight, those puddles had turned into lakes. I could see the glow of their streetlights flickering across the rising water like the eyes of something watching, waiting. The next morning, chaos bloomed. The HOA sent out emergency emails. "Attention residents, please avoid the lower cul-de-sacs. Our drainage system is temporarily overwhelmed." Temporarily. That word made me laugh. I knew their drainage design by heart. I'd studied the blueprints they'd used for the development. It was never meant to handle uncontrolled runoff. Their stormwater retention pond could hold maybe 10,000 gallons. My reservoir had held over a million. When they tore down my dam, they tore out the one thing keeping them safe. And now, the flood was only beginning. By noon, local news crews arrived. A helicopter circled overhead, filming the newly formed Willow Ridge Basin. Cars floated. Lawns turned into swamps. I watched from the ridge, binoculars in hand, as Brian Hensley, the HOA president, waded through knee-deep water in a designer windbreaker, shouting orders into his phone. "Get the county on this." I heard him yell to someone nearby. They said this was supposed to be handled. Oh, it was handled, Brian, just not the way you expected. The county engineers arrived that afternoon. They took one look at the collapsed dam, the fraudulent paperwork, and the sinking homes, and their faces went pale. I saw one of them, a woman named Alvarez, I think, point toward the breach and mutter something about an authorized modification and liability nightmare. She wasn't wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from guilt. No, I long since made peace with what was coming, but from the weight of it. Watching a whole neighborhood drown under its own arrogance was something you couldn't unsee. I walked to the edge of what used to be my reservoir, flashlight cutting through mist. The water gushed freely now, carving new paths through the valley floor, dragging topsoil and asphalt and garden furniture along with it. Somewhere below, a car alarm wailed until the water silenced it. And then, through the rain and the roar, I saw headlights weaving up the access road. A black SUV. It stopped near my gate. Out stepped Hensley, soaked, furious, and desperate. He slammed his door and marched toward me, shoes sinking into the mud. "You happy now, Cole?" he shouted. "You've ruined everything." I tilted my head, calm as the storm raged around us. "I didn't ruin anything, Brian." "You did." He jabbed a finger at me. "You knew this would happen. You knew that dam was dangerous." Dangerous. I stepped closer, the flashlight beam slicing across his face. "That dam protected this valley for half a century. You tore it down for a bill I didn't owe and a lie you told. Now you're drowning in the truth." He glared, trembling. "You think this won't come back on you? The county will." "The county's already seen your forged papers," I interrupted. "Your fake authorization. Your grant application claiming ownership of my property. You didn't just destroy a dam, Brian. You committed federal fraud." For a moment, he was silent. The rain pounded between us like applause. Then he whispered, "You're bluffing." I smiled. "Check your email." He looked confused, but I'd sent it hours earlier, a packet of every document I'd gathered, forwarded to every resident of Willow Ridge, every news outlet, and the county attorney's office. The subject line read, "What the HOA doesn't want you to know." I'd attached the evidence, the forged signatures, the falsified permits, photos of them tearing down the dam. Everything. Within minutes, it was public. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one that erupted online. Over the next few days, Willow Ridge became a national spectacle. News vans lined the highway, journalists trudging through the mud for interviews. Headlines screamed, "Neighborhood floods after HOA destroys private dam." Homeowners demand answers amidst widespread damage. Forgery and fraud allegations rock Willow Creek County. The HOA board resigned within 48 hours, all but Hensley, who refused to step down. He gave a press conference on the steps of what used to be their community center, half-flooded, the flagpole tilting at an angle, blaming bureaucratic confusion and miscommunication. No one believed him. The county filed charges within the week. Fraud, property destruction, negligence, environmental violation, and then the insurance companies came knocking. One by one, the residents of Willow Ridge realized that policies wouldn't cover man-made flooding. Their dream homes were worthless, their basements filled with mud, their driveways cracked, their lawns sinking inch by inch. The development was condemned. I thought that would be the end of it. But revenge is a way of leaving echoes. One evening, maybe a month after the storm, I found a letter taped to my gate. It was from one of the residents, a woman named Julia Perkins. She'd been one of the loudest voices supporting the HOA's actions. I remembered her face from the meetings, sharp, dismissive, always smiling when someone else suffered. Her letter wasn't an apology. It was a plea. She wrote, "My family lost everything. The house, the savings, all gone. The HOA said you'd help rebuild, that you had the funds to restore the dam. Please, Mr. Cole, I'm begging you. Can't you fix what happened?" I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly, placed it in a drawer, and locked it away. Because the truth was, I could fix it. I had the knowledge, the tools, even the plans. But I wouldn't. Some lessons have to stay written in water and ruin. The county eventually seized what was left of Willow Ridge, declaring it an environmental hazard. The homes were abandoned, the streets left cracked and half-buried. Nature began reclaiming it. Vines crawling up mailboxes, cattails sprouting through asphalt. From the ridge, it looked almost peaceful again, like the valley was healing. Sometimes I walk down and see the remnants, children's toys tangled in roots, the faint outlines of once perfect lawns now swamps. And there, at the lowest point, the old HOA office, half submerged, windows shattered, the sign out front reading only LW Rid E. A ghost town with a mortgage. A year later, I stood before the new dam I'd built, smaller this time, reinforced, and legal. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. I'd partnered with the county, who now treated me like the expert I was, not the villain they'd been led to believe. Together, we rebuilt the flow channels properly, restoring balance to the land. When I turned the new gate wheel and watched the water settle, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. But there was one more thing I needed to do. I drove down the old access road, where the floodplain had swallowed what was left of Willow Ridge. The place was silent except for frogs and wind. At the center of the ruins stood a rusted mailbox, the one that had once belonged to Brian Hensley. I'd heard he took a plea deal, 5-year probation, community service, lifetime ban from serving on any association board. His reputation was finished. His family left the state. I knelt beside the mailbox and placed a small plaque in the mud. It read, "Here stood Willow Ridge, proof that greed always sinks." Then I turned and walked back up the hill. The water below glistened under the morning sun, calm now, contained. You might say I got my revenge. But really, it wasn't me. It was the dam, and it remembered who broke it.